The glass walls of the 47th floor penthouse office reflected the Seoul skyline like a crown of diamonds, but Lee Min-jun felt nothing but emptiness as he stared out at the city he practically owned. At 28, he was the youngest CEO in South Korea's history to build a tech empire worth billions, yet every morning felt like another performance in a play he never auditioned for. "Sir, your 3 p.m. meeting with the board is ready," his assistant announced, barely looking up from her tablet. Even she treated him like a transaction rather than a person. Min-jun loosened his designer tie, a $3,000 piece of silk that felt more like a noose. Around him, employees bowed with practiced smiles, their eyes gleaming not with respect, but with calculation. Everyone wanted something, a promotion, a deal, a piece of his fortune. Even his own family had arranged his engagement to Choi Yeon-hee, another chaebol heiress, as if love was just another business merger. That evening, at yet another high society gala, Min-jun watched as socialites flocked around him like moths to a flame. Beautiful faces, designer gowns, and empty conversations about stock prices and luxury vacations. When Yeon-hee wrapped her perfectly manicured fingers around his arm, he felt nothing, just the cold calculation behind her practiced smile. "Darling, the wedding planner wants to discuss the venue tomorrow," she whispered, her breath smelling of expensive champagne. "I'm thinking the Grand Hyatt Ballroom, only the best for Seoul's power couple." But Min-jun was done being Seoul's golden boy. That night, alone in his mansion that felt more like a museum, he made a decision that would change everything. He opened his closet full of handmade suits and reached for something he'd never worn, clothes his housekeeper had accidentally left behind. Simple jeans, a worn t-shirt, and a baseball cap. Looking in the mirror, he barely recognized himself. Gone was the untouchable CEO. In his place stood just a man. For the first time in years, Lee Min-jun smiled genuinely. The next morning, he walked into a small neighborhood cafe, not as the heir to a billion-dollar empire, but as Jun, just another guy looking for work and, unknowingly, searching for something money could never buy: real love. Little did he know, the gentle-eyed waitress who would soon hand him a job application would also hand him his heart, and change both their lives forever. The morning rush at Sunshine Cafe was in full swing when Lee Min-jun, now simply Jun, pushed through the glass door, his heart racing with nervous excitement. The small neighborhood cafe was a world away from the sterile corporate towers he was used to. Mismatched wooden chairs, hand-painted menu boards, and the warm aroma of freshly ground coffee beans created an atmosphere he'd never experienced in his life of luxury. Behind the counter, Han So-rae was gracefully juggling 3 orders at once, her long black hair tied in a simple ponytail, small wisps framing her face as she worked. She wore no makeup except for a hint of pink lip balm, and her genuine smile as she handed customers their orders made Min-jun's chest tighten unexpectedly. "Excuse me." He approached the counter, suddenly feeling more nervous than he'd ever been in boardroom negotiations worth millions. "I saw the help wanted sign in the window." So-rae looked up, and their eyes met for the first time. Her warm brown eyes held no recognition, no calculation, just pure, honest curiosity. To her, he was just another young man looking for work, not the CEO whose face graced magazine covers.
"Oh."
"Yes, we desperately need someone," she said, wiping her flour-dusted hands on her apron. "But I have to warn you, the pay isn't much, and the hours are long. Are you sure you want to apply?" Her concern for a stranger's well-being struck him like lightning. When was the last time someone had worried about him rather than what he could do for them? "I'm sure," he replied, his voice softer than intended. "I'm Jun, by the way." "So-rae," she smiled, extending her hand. The moment their fingers touched, her small, calloused hand meeting his, thankfully he'd removed his expensive watch. Something electric passed between them. The cafe owner, Mrs. Kim, emerged from the back room, took one look at the handsome young man, and hired him on the spot. Min-jun's first day was a disaster in the most beautiful way possible. He'd never operated a coffee machine, had never waited tables, and certainly had never cleaned floors. But every mistake was met with Soare's patient guidance and encouraging laughter. "Here, let me show you," she said when he nearly destroyed the espresso machine for the third time. Standing close behind him, her hand covering his on the lever, she guided him through the process. The scent of her simple shampoo, not designer perfume, just clean and honest, made his head spin. During their lunch break, Soare surprised him by pulling out a homemade sandwich and breaking it in half. "You didn't bring lunch," she observed, offering him the larger piece. "My mom always makes extra. She says sharing food brings good luck." Min-jun stared at the simple sandwich, probably worth less than the appetizers at his usual restaurants, but it was the most precious meal he'd ever been offered. No one had ever shared their food with him. People only offered him things because they expected something in return. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice catching slightly. "Of course. We're co-workers now. We take care of each other here." As they sat on the small bench behind the cafe, sharing her mother's homemade sandwich and talking about everything and nothing, Min-jun felt something he'd forgotten existed: genuine happiness. Soare spoke about her dreams of saving enough money to help her sick father, about the small joys she found in regular customer smiles, about books she borrowed from the library because she couldn't afford to buy them. With every word, every laugh, every moment of her unguarded kindness, Lee Min-jun fell deeper into something he'd never experienced: real, honest love. But as the sun set over their perfect first day together, neither of them knew that across the city, in a luxury penthouse, someone was already searching for the missing billionaire, and she wouldn't be happy with what she'd find. As June and Soare's innocent romance began to bloom over shared lunches and stolen glances, a powerful enemy was already closing in, ready to destroy their happiness before it could truly begin. 3 weeks into his new life, Lee Min-jun had never been happier. Each morning, he woke up not to stock reports and board meetings, but to the anticipation of seeing Soare's smile as she tied her apron and prepared for another day at the cafe. The simple routine of grinding coffee beans, wiping tables, and learning her favorite songs that played on the old radio had become more precious to him than any billion-dollar deal. "June, you're getting really good at the latte art," Soare praised one afternoon, admiring the heart shape he'd managed to create in the foam. Her genuine pride in his small accomplishment made his chest swell with warmth. In his real life, people only praised him for financial achievements, but here, she celebrated him learning to make a simple coffee heart. Their relationship deepened through the most ordinary moments. During slow afternoons, they would sit together, and Soare would share stories about their regular customers: elderly Mr. Park, who came every Tuesday to remember his late wife; the young mother who treated herself to one expensive coffee per week as her only luxury. Soare's compassion for everyone around her amazed Min-jun, who had grown up in a world where people were either useful or obstacles. "You have such a kind heart," he told her one evening as they cleaned up together, the cafe empty except for them. "Everyone deserves kindness," she replied simply, not knowing how those words pierced through years of his cynical armor. "Don't you think so?" The turning point came on a rainy Thursday night. Min-jun had been feeling unwell all day, probably just exhaustion from his double life, but he'd refused to leave Soare alone during the busy evening shift. By closing time, he was barely standing, fever making him dizzy. "June, you're burning up," Soare gasped, pressing her cool hand to his forehead. Without hesitation, she locked up the cafe and guided him to her tiny studio apartment above the neighboring building. Her home was smaller than his walk-in closet, with a single room that served as bedroom, living room, and kitchen. But it was filled with warmth, handmade quilts, photographs of her family, books stacked carefully on improvised shelves. On her small desk, he noticed medical bills and her father's prescription receipts, held down by a small jar of coins, her savings. "You should go to a hospital," she worried, helping him sit on her small couch. "No, I'm okay," he insisted, not wanting to burden her further. In his real life, he could afford the best medical care in the world, but here, as June, he had to be careful. Soare disappeared into her tiny kitchen and returned with homemade soup, still warm from her thermos, her own dinner. "My grandmother's recipe," she said, sitting beside him and carefully feeding him spoonfuls. She always said food made with love was the best medicine. As she took care of him through the night, checking his temperature, bringing him water, staying awake to make sure he was okay, Min-jun realized something that shook him to his core. This wasn't just attraction or infatuation. This was love. Real, deep, transformative love. "Why are you so good to me?" he whispered in the darkness, his fever-hazed voice vulnerable. Soare smiled, brushing damp hair from his forehead with infinite tenderness. "Because you matter, June. Everyone deserves to be cared for when they're sick." The next morning, he woke up not only recovered, but changed. As Soare bustled around making breakfast from the few ingredients she had, humming softly, Min-jun watched her with wonder. She had given up her own comfort, her own food, her own sleep, for someone she believed was just a poor café worker. "Soare," he called softly. "Yes?" She turned, morning sunlight from the small window making her hair glow. "Thank you for everything." Something shifted in that moment. The way she looked at him, the way her cheeks flushed pink, the way she quickly turned back to the stove. Min-jun realized his feelings weren't one-sided. Their first almost kiss happened that evening at the cafe. They were alone, cleaning up after a busy day, when their favorite song came on the radio, a soft ballad about finding love in unexpected places. Without thinking, Min-jun reached for her hand. "Dance with me?" he asked, his heart pounding. Soare laughed, but let him pull her into the middle of the small cafe. They swayed together between the empty tables, her head eventually resting against his chest, his arms wrapped around her small frame. When she lifted her face to look at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears of happiness, he almost told her everything, who he really was, how much he loved her, how he wanted to give her the world. But the weight of his deception held him back. How could he explain that he'd been lying about everything? That he'd been testing her worthiness like some kind of twisted experiment? "What are you thinking about?" Soare whispered, her fingers tracing the worried lines on his forehead. "Just how perfect this moment is," he replied, which was the absolute truth. As they held each other in the dim cafe, both their hearts full of new love, neither noticed the black sedan that had been parked across the street for the past 3 days, or the telephoto lens capturing every tender moment through the window. Their fairy tale was about to become a nightmare, and the woman who would destroy it was already making her plans. But while June and Soare fell deeper in love, a furious heiress was studying photographs of their tender moments, her manicured nails drumming against her phone as she dialed her private investigator. "I want to know everything about this girl. And I mean everything." In the marble-lined penthouse of Gangnam's most exclusive tower, Choi Yeon-hee stood before floor-to-ceiling windows, her perfectly manicured fingers gripping a crystal glass of wine so tightly it threatened to shatter. The photographs scattered across her Italian leather desk told a story that made her blood boil. Her fiancé, the man who belonged to her, laughing with some nobody in a pathetic little cafe. At 26, Yeon-hee had never been denied anything she wanted. Born into one of Korea's most powerful chaebol families, she was used to the world bending to her will. Designer clothes, luxury cars, exclusive parties, and most importantly, Lee Min-jun. He wasn't just her arranged fiancé. He was her prize, her trophy, the final piece in her perfect life puzzle. "Ma'am." Her private investigator, Mr. Jang, entered the opulent room with a thick manila folder. "I have the complete report you requested." Yeon-hee's cold eyes scanned the documents, her expression growing more venomous with each page. Han Soare, 24 years old, works as a waitress, lives in a studio apartment in Hongdae. Father has chronic illness requiring expensive treatment, family debt of approximately 50 million won. She laughed bitterly. "A gold digger. I knew it." But as she continued reading, seeing details about Soare's volunteer work at the local shelter, her perfect attendance record despite working multiple jobs, and testimonials from neighbors about her kindness, Yeon-hee's anger transformed into something more dangerous. Jealousy mixed with genuine threat recognition. This wasn't just some opportunist trying to seduce a rich man. This girl was actually good. Pure. Everything Yeon-hee had never been and could never be. And worse, The photos showed something in Min-jun's eyes she'd never seen before. Genuine happiness. "How long has this been going on?" she demanded, her voice sharp as a blade. "Based on our surveillance, approximately 3 weeks, ma'am." He's been working at the café under the name June and appears to be quite invested in maintaining his cover. Yeon-hee's perfectly applied lipstick curved into a cruel smile. "Invested? Oh, my dear Min-jun, you always were too sentimental." She walked to her walk-in closet, larger than Soare's entire apartment, and selected a black Chanel suit, her war armor. "Cancel all my appointments tomorrow. I have a little coffee shop to visit." The next morning, as Soare hummed happily while preparing the morning brew, completely unaware of the storm approaching, a sleek black Bentley pulled up outside Sunshine Cafe. Yeon-hee emerged like a predator in designer heels, her every movement calculated to intimidate. The moment she entered the humble cafe, the atmosphere shifted. Other customers instinctively moved aside as she surveyed the space with obvious disgust, taking in the mismatched furniture, the hand-painted menu, the simple charm that had captured Min-jun's heart. Soare looked up from behind the counter, offering her usual warm smile. "Good morning. What can I get you today?" "Information," Yeon-hee replied coldly, placing one of the surveillance photos on the counter. Min-jun and Soare sharing lunch, his hand covering hers. "About the man in this picture." Soare's face went pale as she recognized herself and June in the intimate moment. I don't understand. Who are you?" "I'm Choi Yeon-hee," she announced, as if the name should mean something. When Soare's expression remained confused, Yeon-hee's anger flared. "Lee Min-jun's fiancé, though I suppose you know him as June." The color drained completely from Soare's face. "Fiancé? But there must be some mistake." "Oh, there's been a mistake, all right," Yeon-hee's voice dripped with venom. "But it wasn't mine." She leaned across the counter, her expensive perfume overwhelming in the small space. "Did you really think someone like him could actually care about someone like you?" At that moment, Min-jun walked in from the back room, freezing when he saw the two most important women in his life facing each other. His carefully constructed worlds were colliding in the most devastating way possible. "Yeon-hee," he breathed, his face going ashen. "Hello, darling," she purred, her voice switching to honey-sweet manipulation. "I've been so worried about you. Your little experiment seems to have gone on long enough, don't you think?" Soare looked between them, her heart breaking as pieces of the puzzle fell into place. The way he never talked about his past, his oddly perfect pronunciation despite claiming to be uneducated, the expensive watch he sometimes forgot to remove. "June," she whispered, her voice small and broken. "What is she talking about?" Yeon-hee laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, you poor, naive little thing. June? His name is Lee Min-jun. He's the CEO of MJ Industries, worth approximately $2.8 billion, and he's been engaged to me for 6 months. She pulled out her phone, showing engagement photos of her and Min-jun at various high society events. "This has all been a little game to him, sweetie. Rich boys get so bored, you know." The coffee cup in Soare's hand slipped, shattering on the floor as her world crumbled around her. The man she'd fallen in love with, the man she'd cared for, shared her food with, opened her heart to, had been lying about everything. "Soare, please let me explain." Min-jun stepped forward desperately. "Explain what?" Yeon-hee interrupted triumphantly. "How you've been slumming it with the help. How you let this girl embarrass herself thinking she actually had a chance with someone of your status." As Soare's eyes filled with tears of humiliation and heartbreak, and Min-jun struggled to find words that could repair the damage, Yeon-hee smiled with cold satisfaction. Phase 1 of her plan was complete. Now it was time to make sure this pathetic little romance was destroyed forever. After all, Lee Min-jun belonged to her, and she'd stop at nothing to reclaim what was rightfully hers. As Soare's world shattered and Min-jun faced the consequences of his deception, Yeon-hee was just getting started. The public humiliation was only the beginning. Her real plan to destroy them both was far more sinister than either could imagine. That same evening, in her penthouse office overlooking Seoul's glittering skyline, Yeon-hee spread out files like a general planning a war. The confrontation at the café had been satisfying, but it was merely the opening move. She'd seen the way Min-jun looked at that girl, with genuine love, something he'd never shown her despite years of engagement. That made Soare more than just an obstacle. She was a real threat. Mr. Jang, she called to her investigator, who sat across from her mahogany desk. I need everything. Bank records, medical bills, family history, employment records, every vulnerability this girl has. The investigator slid additional folders across the desk. Already done, ma'am. The Han family situation is precarious. Yeon-hee's eyes lit up as she read. Soare's father, Han Kyung-soo, had been battling lung cancer for 2 years. The medical bills were astronomical, far beyond what a cafe waitress could ever afford. The family had already mortgaged their small house, taken out multiple loans, and were still 50 million won in debt to the hospital. Perfect, she whispered, her mind already calculating. What about the mother? Works 3 cleaning jobs to help pay the bills. The family is hanging by a thread financially. One major expense could destroy them completely. Yeon-hee's smile was predatory. And if, hypothetically, someone were to accelerate their financial crisis? Mr. Jang shifted uncomfortably. Ma'am, I'm not sure I understand. The hospital bills, the house mortgage, the personal loans, I want you to buy all their debts. Quietly. Through shell companies. I want to own every penny they owe. She stood, pacing to the window like a caged panther. Then, I want you to find their creditors and encourage them to demand immediate payment. Meanwhile, across the city in her tiny apartment, Soare sat on her small bed, still in shock from the day's revelations. She'd called in sick to the cafe, something she'd never done before, unable to face the place where every memory was now tainted with lies. Her phone buzzed with messages from June. No, Min-jun, but she couldn't bring herself to read them. How could she have been so naive? Every kind gesture, every shared laugh, every moment she'd thought was genuine had been part of some cruel experiment. A knock at her door interrupted her spiral of self-recrimination. Her mother stood in the doorway, eyes red from crying. Soare, we need to talk, her mother said, holding official-looking documents with shaking hands. What's wrong, Yama? The hospital called. They're demanding immediate payment of your father's remaining treatment costs. All of it, 30 million won, by the end of the week. If we can't pay. Her voice broke. They'll stop his chemotherapy. Soare's blood ran cold. But we had a payment plan, the doctor said. They sold our debt to a collection agency. The new company says we violated the terms somehow. Her mother collapsed into the single chair, looking defeated. And there's more. The mortgage company is demanding full payment of the house loan. The personal loan sharks are calling every hour. Soare stared at the papers, her mind reeling. This couldn't be coincidence. Just hours after her confrontation with Yeon-hee, her family's entire financial world was collapsing. Her phone rang. Unknown number. Hello, Soare. Yeon-hee's voice was silk over steel. I hope you're having a pleasant evening. You, Soare breathed. You did this to my family. Did what? I'm just a concerned citizen who happened to invest in some debt collection companies. It's amazing how quickly these financial institutions work when properly motivated. Soare's hands shook with rage and desperation. My father will die without his treatment. How can you be so cruel? Cruel? Oh, sweetie, I haven't even started. Yeon-hee's laugh was chilling. But I'm not unreasonable. I have a proposition for you. I won't listen to this. 50 million won. Yeon-hee interrupted. Cash. Enough to pay your father's medical bills, clear your family's debts, and give you a fresh start somewhere far from Seoul. Despite herself, Soare felt a flicker of hope. What do you want? It's simple. Disappear. Leave Seoul. Leave Min-jun and never contact him again. Take the money, save your father, and start a new life where you belong, far away from people like us. And if I refuse? Yeon-hee's voice turned ice cold. Then your father dies, your family loses everything, and I make sure you never find work anywhere in this city again. I have connections you can't imagine, Soare. I can make your life very, very difficult. Soare closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. 50 million won would save her family, but it would also mean betraying her own heart and confirming everything Yeon-hee believed about her, that she was just a gold digger who could be bought. You have 24 hours to decide, Yeon-hee continued. Meet me tomorrow night at the Shilla Hotel, penthouse suite. Come alone, and don't even think about telling Min-jun about our little chat. I'd hate for your father's condition to worsen unexpectedly. The line went dead, leaving Soare alone with an impossible choice: save her family or follow her heart. Either way, she would lose everything that mattered. As she sat in her dark apartment, holding her father's medical bills in one hand and her phone full of Min-jun's desperate messages in the other, Soare realized that Yeon-hee had crafted the perfect trap. There was no way to win, no path that didn't lead to heartbreak. But what Yeon-hee didn't know was that across town, Min-jun was conducting his own investigation. And when a billionaire CEO decides to fight for love, he has resources that even a chaebol heiress might not expect. The war for Soare's heart was just beginning, and the battlefield was about to get much more dangerous. As Soare faced the impossible choice between love and family, and Yeon-hee celebrated her manipulative victory, Min-jun was making desperate calls to his most trusted allies. But would his efforts to save the woman he loved only drive her further away when she discovered just how deep his deception truly ran? The 24 hours he had given Soare felt like a lifetime of agony. She'd spent the night pacing her tiny apartment, her father's labored breathing from the next room a constant reminder of what was at stake. By morning, dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her decision was made. She had no choice but to save her family, even if it meant destroying her own heart. At Sunshine Cafe, Min-jun waited desperately for Soare to arrive for her shift. He'd barely slept, his mind racing with plans to explain everything, to make her understand that his feelings had always been real, even if his identity wasn't. When the cafe owner, Mrs. Kim, mentioned that Soare had called in sick again, his heart sank deeper. She's never missed work before, Mrs. Kim worried. Maybe you should check on her, June. You two seemed close. Min-jun didn't need to be asked twice. He practically ran to Soare's apartment building, taking the narrow stairs 3 at a time. But when he knocked on her door, the voice that answered wasn't the warm, melodic tone he'd fallen in love with. It was cold, distant, broken. Go away, Min-jun, Soare said through the door. Even hearing his real name from her lips felt like a knife to his chest. Soare, please. Just let me explain. I know how this looks, but... The door opened abruptly, and Min-jun's words died in his throat. The woman before him was a shadow of the vibrant, hopeful girl he'd known. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying, her face pale with exhaustion and heartbreak. Explain what? She demanded, her voice shaking with emotion. How you've been lying to me from the moment we met. How every conversation, every shared meal, every moment I thought was genuine was just part of your little social experiment. That's not, he started, but she held up her hand. Was any of it real, Min-jun? When you let me take care of you when you were sick, when you danced with me in the cafe, when you made me believe that someone could actually care about me, was any of it real? The raw pain in her voice shattered him. Everything I felt for you is real. Soare, I love you. Love. She laughed bitterly, tears streaming down her face. You don't love me. You don't even know me. You loved the idea of me, the project of me. The poor little waitress who passed your test of authenticity. No, that's not true. Then why? She screamed, all her anguish pouring out. Why did you lie about everything? Your name, your job, your entire life? If you really cared about me, why couldn't you trust me with the truth? Min-jun opened his mouth but found no words. How could he explain that he'd been protecting himself from gold diggers when she'd never asked him for anything? How could he justify testing her love when she'd given it so freely? You want to know what hurts the most? Soare continued, her voice breaking. I actually defended you. When that woman, your fiancée, told everyone at the café that you were just playing with me, I defended you. I told them you weren't that kind of person. She wiped her tears angrily. But I was wrong, wasn't I? You are exactly that kind of person. Soare, please. I shared everything with you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. My dreams, my fears, my food, my heart. I told you about my father's illness, about how hard we were struggling, and you just watched. You watched me worry about money, while sitting on billions of dollars. How could you do that to someone you claim to love? The accusation hit him like a physical blow. He had watched her count coins for her father's medicine while he could have solved all her problems with a single phone call. He'd been so focused on his own emotional experiment that he'd ignored her real suffering. I wanted to help. With what? With your minimum wage salary? Her laugh was hollow. Or were you planning to eventually reveal your true identity like some fairy tale prince, expecting me to be grateful for the deception? At that moment, Soare's phone rang. She glanced at it, and her face went even paler. I have to go, she said quietly. Where? Soare, we need to talk about this. There's nothing to talk about. She grabbed her jacket, her movements mechanical, defeated. Whatever game you were playing, it's over. I can't do this anymore. This isn't a game. Min-jun called after her as she headed down the stairs. My feelings for you are real. She stopped at the bottom of the stairwell, not turning around. Your feelings might be real, Min-jun, but everything else about you is a lie. And I can't love someone who doesn't exist. Soare, wait. But she was already walking away, her small figure disappearing into the Seoul afternoon crowd. Min-jun stood frozen in the stairwell, watching the love of his life walk out of his world, taking his heart with her. What he didn't know was that Soare was walking straight into Yeon-hee's trap, her phone clutched in her shaking hand with the message, Shilla Hotel. Penthouse. 1 hour. Bring nothing but your decision. As she climbed into the taxi that would take her to sell her heart for her father's life, Soare allowed herself one last look back at the building where she'd been happiest she'd ever been. In the distance, she could see Min-jun's figure in the stairwell, and for a moment, her resolve wavered. But then she thought of her father's labored breathing, her mother's tears, and the impossible weight of their financial desperation. Some choices weren't really choices at all. Drive, she told the taxi driver, not looking back again. Behind them, Min-jun finally understood that losing Soare wasn't just about losing love. It was about losing the only person who had ever seen him as just human. And now, thanks to his own deception, she was gone forever. Or so he thought. As Soare made her way to the devil's bargain that would save her family but destroy her heart, Min-jun stood alone, finally understanding the true cost of his lies. But neither of them knew that Yeon-hee's cruelest manipulation was yet to come, and this separation was only the beginning of her master plan to destroy them both. The Shilla Hotel penthouse was a monument to luxury that made Soare feel even smaller and more out of place. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow shadows across marble floors, and the floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of Seoul that seemed to mock her humble origins. Yeon-hee waited on the pristine white sofa, a briefcase beside her and a victorious smile playing on her perfectly painted lips. You came, Yeon-hee said, not bothering to hide her satisfaction. I wasn't sure you had the intelligence to make the right choice. Soare stood in the doorway, her simple clothes and tear-stained face a stark contrast to the opulent surroundings. I'm here for my father, not for you. Of course. Yeon-hee opened the briefcase, revealing neat stacks of cash. 50 million won as promised. Enough to save Daddy's life and disappear from mine. She closed it with a sharp click. But first, I need insurance that you'll honor our agreement. What do you mean? Yeon-hee pulled out a legal document, a non-disclosure agreement, and a restraining order. You'll sign both, agreeing never to contact Min-jun again, never to speak about your relationship publicly, and to leave Seoul within 48 hours. Soare's hands trembled as she read the papers. Each clause felt like another nail in the coffin of her love story. But her father's face flashed in her mind, pale, weak, fighting for every breath. Fine, she whispered, signing both documents with a shaking hand. Excellent. Yeon-hee pushed the briefcase across the coffee table. Take your money and go. And so are I. Her voice turned razor-sharp. If you ever try to contact him, even once, I'll make sure your father's treatment stops permanently. Are we clear? Soare grabbed the briefcase and ran from the penthouse, Yeon-hee's cruel laughter echoing behind her. Meanwhile, Min-jun had spent 3 sleepless days trying to find Soare. She'd disappeared completely. The café, her apartment, even her mother's workplace yielded no clues. Desperate and broken, he sat in his real office for the first time in weeks, staring out at the city lights that no longer held any beauty. A soft knock interrupted his misery. Min-jun. Yeon-hee entered, her expression perfectly crafted to show concern and sympathy. She wore a simple black dress, understated for her, designed to appear supportive rather than triumphant. Yeon-hee, I'm not in the mood. I heard about what happened, she said softly, approaching his desk. About the girl from the cafe. I'm so sorry. Min-jun looked up, surprised by her apparent gentleness. You were right. It was foolish of me to think. No, Yeon-hee interrupted, settling into the chair across from him. You weren't foolish for wanting real love, but perhaps you were naive about her motives. What do you mean? Yeon-hee pulled out her phone, her expression carefully arranged to show reluctant concern. I didn't want to show you this, but I think you deserve to know the truth about why she really left. On her screen was a photograph. Soare leaving the Shilla Hotel with the briefcase full of money, looking around nervously before getting into a taxi. Min-jun's heart stopped. Where did you get this? My driver was at the hotel yesterday. He recognized her from the cafe. Yeon-hee's voice was perfectly modulated, sad but not accusatory. Min-jun, I think she played you far better than you played her. That's impossible. Soare isn't like that. Look at the timestamp, Yeon-hee said gently, showing him the phone. This was taken just hours after your confrontation. She went straight from breaking up with you to this. Min-jun studied the photo, his world tilting. The briefcase, Soare's nervous expression, the luxury hotel. It all painted a picture he didn't want to believe. I had my investigator look into it discreetly. Yeon-hee continued, her tone sympathetic. Apparently, her family's debts were paid off in full yesterday. Anonymous benefactor. She paused, letting the implications sink in. Min-jun, I think she's been playing a much longer game than either of us realized. No, Min-jun said weakly, but doubt was creeping in. She wouldn't the way she looked at me. She's a good actress, I'll give her that. Yeon-hee moved around the desk, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. Think about it. A poor girl suddenly has her family's massive debts mysteriously disappear right after meeting a billionaire? She probably recognized you from the beginning. Min-jun's mind raced through memories, Yeon-hee's poison reframing every moment. Soare's kindness when he was sick. Had she been manipulating him? Her worry about his low-paying job. Had she been hinting for him to reveal his wealth? Her tears when she discovered his identity. Had they been tears of frustration at being caught? I'm sorry, Yeon-hee whispered, her arms encircling him in what appeared to be comfort, but was actually possession. I know how much you wanted to believe in her. Over the following days, Yeon-hee orchestrated her campaign of comfort with surgical precision. She appeared at his office with his favorite meals, stayed late to keep him company, listened patiently as he wrestled with his heartbreak. To everyone watching, she was the devoted fiancée helping her man through a difficult time. But behind closed doors, she carefully fed his doubts. I heard through my connections that she left Seoul, Yeon-hee mentioned casually one evening as they shared dinner in his office. Moved to Busan with her family. Bought a nice house, apparently. Each detail was carefully chosen to reinforce the narrative of Soare as a calculating gold digger who had successfully conned him and disappeared with her prize. Maybe it's for the best, she added, watching his face carefully. At least now you know who really cares about you. Who's always been here, through everything. Min-jun looked at her, beautiful, sophisticated, never asking him for anything because she already had everything. Had he been blind to her loyalty while chasing a fantasy? You're right, he said finally, his voice hollow. At least I know now. Yeon-hee smiled, but he was too lost in his manipulated grief to notice the coldness in her eyes. Her plan was working perfectly. Not only had she eliminated her rival, but she turned Min-jun's love into bitter cynicism, making him believe that gold diggers were everywhere, except, of course, for the woman who had stood by him through his foolish experiment. As she leaned against him, offering false comfort while internally celebrating her victory, Yeon-hee allowed herself a moment of pure satisfaction. Soirée was gone. Min-jun was broken and dependent on her support, and soon, very soon, she would have everything she'd ever wanted. What she didn't know was that across the city, a loyal assistant named Secretary Park was beginning to ask questions about some very suspicious financial transactions. And when you're dealing with a billionaire's resources, the truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply it's buried. As Yeon-hee basked in her seemingly perfect victory, consolidating her hold over a heartbroken Min-jun who now believed his greatest love had been his greatest deception, the threads of her web were about to unravel. Because the one thing she hadn't counted on was the loyalty of those who truly cared about their boss, and the power of love to survive even the cruelest manipulations. Secretary Park Jin-woo had worked for Lee Min-jun for 5 years, and in all that time, he'd never seen his boss so utterly destroyed. The vibrant, determined CEO who had built an empire through sheer willpower had become a hollow shell, mechanically going through meetings while Yeon-hee hovered constantly at his side like a beautiful vulture. But Park was observant. It was what made him invaluable. And something about this entire situation felt wrong. It started with small inconsistencies. Yeon-hee's sudden, convenient presence during Min-jun's crisis. Her perfectly timed discoveries about Soirée's supposed deception. And most suspicious of all, the mysterious benefactor who had paid off the Han family's debts. Sir, Park approached Min-jun's desk one gray Seoul morning, 3 weeks after Soirée's disappearance. I need to discuss some irregularities in our recent financial reports. Min-jun barely looked up from his untouched coffee. Handle it yourself, Park. I trust your judgment. Sir, this requires your attention. There have been several large cash withdrawals from accounts connected to personal matters. That got Min-jun's attention. What kind of personal matters? Park hesitated, glancing toward the door where Yeon-hee often appeared unannounced. Perhaps we should discuss this privately, away from the office. An hour later, they sat in a quiet corner of a small café. Ironic, since Min-jun couldn't enter any café now without thinking of Soirée. Park spread out financial documents with the precision of a detective building a case. 3 weeks ago, 50 million won was withdrawn from a shell company connected to the Choi family businesses. Park began carefully. The same day, an anonymous payment was made to Seoul National Hospital for Han Kyung-soo's medical bills. Min-jun's blood ran cold. The Choi family? You mean? Miss Yeon-hee's family, yes, sir. But that's not all. Park pulled out more documents. Multiple debt collection agencies that had been pressuring the Han family were also paid off by the same shell company. All on the same day Soirée left Seoul. The coffee cup slipped from Min-jun's numb fingers. Are you suggesting? I'm suggesting someone orchestrated the Han family's financial crisis and then solved it, all while making it appear that Soirée had found a mysterious benefactor. Park's voice was careful but firm. Someone with significant resources and detailed knowledge of their situation. Min-jun's mind reeled. The photograph of Soirée leaving the hotel with the briefcase. What if she hadn't been collecting payment for services rendered, but accepting money to disappear? What if her tears of heartbreak had been genuine, and she'd been forced to choose between love and her father's life? There's more, sir. Park pulled out a recording device. I took the liberty of having Miss Yeon-hee's recent activities investigated. This conversation was recorded yesterday. He pressed play, and Yeon-hee's voice filled the quiet cafe, speaking to someone on the phone. The little waitress is completely gone, don't worry. I made sure of that. Min-jun actually believes she was a gold digger now. It's almost too easy. Men are so predictable when their pride is wounded. Yes, the restraining order is still in effect. She can't contact him even if she wanted to. No, he has no idea I orchestrated the whole thing. As far as he knows, I'm the devoted fiancée who helped him through his heartbreak. The blood drained from Min-jun's face as the full scope of Yeon-hee's manipulation became clear. She hadn't just separated him from So-ra, she'd systematically destroyed their relationship, manipulated both their emotions, and then positioned herself as a savior. So-ra never betrayed me, he whispered, the truth hitting him like a physical blow. She sacrificed herself to save her father.
It appears so, sir.
Miss Yeon-hee created an impossible situation where So-ra had to choose between your love and her family's survival. Park's expression was grim. She chose her family, and Miss Yeon-hee made sure you'd interpret that choice as betrayal. Min-jun stood abruptly, rage and heartbreak warring in his chest. Where is So-ra now?
Busan, sir.
She's working at a small medical clinic, living quietly with her parents. Her father's treatment is ongoing and successful. Park paused. Sir, there's something else. The restraining order Miss Yeon-hee made her sign. It's not legally binding. It was just intimidation. She can't contact me, but I can contact her. Min-jun realized, hope and terror flooding through him in equal measure. Yes, sir. But given the trauma Miss Yeon-hee has inflicted on both of you, Park's voice was gentle. It may not be easy to rebuild what was broken. Min-jun was already moving toward the door. Park, I need you to prepare a complete dossier of Yeon-hee's activities. Every illegal manipulation, every fraudulent transaction, every lie. If she wants to play games with people's lives, she's about to learn the consequences. And Miss So-ra, sir? Min-jun paused, his hand on the door handle. I don't know if she'll ever forgive me for not protecting her from this. But I have to try. I have to tell her the truth, that I never stopped loving her, and that I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to see through Yeon-hee's manipulation. As he rushed back to his office to confront the woman who had destroyed his happiness, Min-jun felt something he hadn't experienced in weeks. Hope. So-ra hadn't betrayed him. Her love had been real, even when she'd been forced to walk away from it. But first, he had a reckoning to face. Yeon-hee was waiting in his office, probably planning her next move in what she thought was her completed victory. She was about to discover that the game was far from over. The elevator climbed toward his office, carrying him toward a confrontation that would either destroy Yeon-hee's carefully constructed lies or expose him as a fool for hoping. But for the first time in weeks, Min-jun felt like himself again, the man who had built an empire by never backing down from a fight. And he was about to fight for the most important thing he'd ever lost, the love of a woman who had sacrificed everything for her family, including her own happiness. As Min-jun rode the elevator toward his confrontation with Yeon-hee, armed with the devastating truth of her manipulations, she sat in his office, smugly planning their engagement announcement. Neither of them knew that in Busan, So-ra was receiving a phone call that would force her to return to Seoul and face the love she thought she'd lost forever. The elevator doors opened to reveal Yeon-hee sitting behind Min-jun's desk like a queen on her throne, casually flipping through wedding magazines. She looked up with her practiced smile, completely unaware that her carefully constructed empire of lies was about to crumble. Darling, perfect timing, she purred, standing gracefully. I've been planning our engagement announcement. I thought we could. Get out of my chair. Min-jun's voice was ice-cold steel. Yeon-hee's smile faltered slightly at his tone, but she maintained her composure. Min-jun, what's wrong? You seem upset. Upset. He laughed bitterly, walking around the desk to face her. I'm beyond upset, Yeon-hee. I'm furious. I'm disgusted. And I'm done. I don't understand. 50 million won, he said quietly, watching her face. Shell companies. Debt manipulation. Anonymous benefactors. With each phrase, he watched her perfect mask slip a little more. Should I continue? Or do you want to explain yourself? Yeon-hee's face went pale, but she quickly regrouped, switching to her backup strategy. Innocent confusion. Min-jun, I have no idea what you're talking about. Are you feeling all right? You've been under so much stress. Don't. His voice cut through her performance like a blade. Don't you dare gaslight me anymore. I know everything, Yeon-hee. The manufactured debt crisis, the forced choice, the restraining order, the lies about Soare being a gold digger. He pulled out his phone, playing Park's recording. I especially enjoyed the part where you called her the little waitress and bragged about how easy I was to manipulate. Her own voice filled the room, destroying any possibility of denial. Yeon-hee stood frozen as her words condemned her. Men are so predictable when their pride is wounded. He has no idea I orchestrated the whole thing. When the recording ended, the silence was deafening. You destroyed the woman I love, Min-jun continued, his voice shaking with controlled rage. You tortured her family, forced her into an impossible choice, and then convinced me she had betrayed me. All so you could play the devoted fiancée consoling me through my heartbreak. Yeon-hee's mask finally shattered completely. The sweet, concerned expression melted away, replaced by cold fury and desperate calculation. So what? She snapped, her true nature finally revealed. So what if I did all of that? She was nobody, a pathetic little waitress who could never give you what I can. I saved you from making the biggest mistake of your life. You saved me? Min-jun stared at her in disbelief. You systematically destroyed two people's lives for your own selfish desires. I love you, Yeon-hee screamed, all pretense of control gone. I've loved you since we were children. My entire life has been about becoming worthy of you, and you threw it all away for some common girl who serves coffee. You don't love me, Min-jun said with devastating calm. You love the idea of owning me. Love doesn't manipulate, Yeon-hee. Love doesn't destroy. Love doesn't force people to choose between their heart and their family's survival. At that moment, the office door opened. Park entered, followed by an unexpected figure that made both Min-jun's heart stop and Yeon-hee's face contort with rage. Soare stood in the doorway, beautiful and heartbroken, wearing a simple dress that made her look like an angel compared to Yeon-hee's designer armor. Her eyes found Min-jun's immediately, and the love that still lived there despite everything nearly brought him to his knees. What is she doing here? Yeon-hee hissed. I called her, Park said calmly. When we discovered the truth about the restraining order, I thought she deserved to know it was fraudulent. She has every right to be here. Soare stepped into the room, her chin raised with quiet dignity despite the obvious pain in her eyes. I heard about the investigation, she said, her voice steady but strained. I came to make sure the truth was told. The truth? Yeon-hee laughed harshly. The truth is that you're a gold digger who got exactly what she wanted. Money to save your pathetic father. The truth, Soare replied, looking directly at Min-jun, is that I took your money because my father was dying and you made it clear that was my only choice. But every day since then, I've hated myself for it. Not because I regret saving my father's life, but because I let you convince me that love could be bought and sold. She turned to Yeon-hee, and for the first time, her voice carried steel. I never wanted Min-jun's money. I fell in love with Jun, the man who made terrible coffee, who shared my simple lunches, who danced with me in an empty cafe. You couldn't understand that because you've never loved anyone more than yourself. How dare you? Yeon-hee started forward, but Min-jun stepped between them. Enough, he said firmly. Yeon-hee, you're done. The engagement is over, permanently. I'm having my lawyers review every illegal action you've taken, and if I find grounds for prosecution, I will pursue them. You can't do this to me. Yeon-hee's composure completely shattered. My family, your family, we have contracts, agreements. We have nothing, Min-jun said coldly. And after what you've done, you're lucky I'm not pursuing criminal charges for extortion and fraud. Yeon-hee looked between Min-jun and Soare, her face twisted with hatred and desperation. This isn't over, she spat. You think your little love story will work? She'll never trust you again. I made sure of that. Maybe, Soare said quietly, but at least now we both know the truth. That has to count for something. Yeon-hee stormed from the office, her heels clicking like gunshots on the marble floor. The door slammed behind her with such force that the windows rattled. In the sudden silence, Min-jun and Soare stood facing each other across the expensive office, the weight of everything they'd been through hanging between them like a chasm. "Soare," Min-jun began, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. I should have protected you. I should have seen through her lies. I should have. You should have trusted me," Soare finished softly. "And I should have trusted you enough to tell you about my father's illness, about our debts, about how desperate we were. Can you ever forgive me?" Soare looked at him, really looked at him, seeing not the billionaire CEO or the disguised cafe worker, but the man who had held her while she was afraid, who had danced with her in the moonlight, who had loved her enough to risk everything just to find out if that love was real. "The question isn't whether I can forgive you," she said, tears streaming down her face. "The question is whether we can forgive ourselves for letting someone else's poison destroy what we had." As they stood there, two people who had been systematically destroyed by manipulation and lies, the first tentative spark of hope began to kindle between them. But healing would take time. Trust would have to be rebuilt, and love, real, honest love, would have to prove it was stronger than the cruelest deceptions. With Yeon-hee's web of lies finally exposed and her manipulations brought into the light, Min-jun and Soare faced their greatest challenge yet, not defeating their enemy, but healing the wounds she had inflicted on their hearts. Could love truly conquer all, or had too much damage been done for their fairy tale to have a happy ending? After Yeon-hee's public exposure, Min-jun finds Soare on the café terrace where they first met. She's hesitant, still hurt by the betrayal, but willing to listen. He kneels before her, not as the powerful CEO, but as the simple man she knew and loved. "Soare, I know I lied about who I was, but my feelings for you have always been the only truth in my life. When I was by your side, I finally discovered who I really am. Not the CEO, not the heir, but just Min-jun, the man who loves you." Rain begins to fall and Soare finally gives in, running into his arms. The kiss in the rain represents the rebirth of their love, now based on complete truth. 6 months later, defying all high society expectations, Min-jun organizes exactly the wedding Soare always dreamed of, a simple ceremony in her parents' garden. Wildflowers decorate the homemade altar. Neighborhood friends help with the organization. Soare wears a simple but radiant dress, while Min-jun wears a common suit. Her mother cries with joy, and cafe colleagues serve as groomsmen and bridesmaids. In their handwritten vows, they promise love, honesty, and simplicity. Min-jun hands Soare the keys to a small house he bought in her neighborhood. "This is our real home, where we'll just be ourselves, without masks." Meanwhile, Yeon-hee faces the consequences of her manipulations. Publicly exposed, she loses prestige in high society, faces legal proceedings for blackmail, and ends up alone, finally understanding that she never had true love. She watches the wedding from afar, then leaves for abroad seeking personal redemption. Min-jun returns to the company transformed, implementing fairer policies, creating social programs, and working regular hours to have time with Soare. The company doesn't lose profits, but gains humanity. 1 year later, in the same cafe where they met, now Soare's property, the couple lives a simple and fulfilling life. Soare, visibly pregnant, serves customers with the same warm smile as always, while Min-jun helps in the kitchen genuinely happy. A sign on the wall reads "True Love Cafe," and customers from all social classes coexist harmoniously. Soare asks, "Do you regret giving up the luxury life?" Min-jun responds smiling, "How can I regret finding the greatest treasure of my life?" The couple dances slowly in the cafe, proving that true love can flourish in the simplest places. The story ends with the lesson that true love knows no social boundaries and flourishes where there is sincerity, grows with honesty, and perpetuates through simplicity.